Here comes Hurricane Dorian. I'm on the ground in South Florida. We're going to talk about it on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, Chuck Holton here. I'm in South Florida tonight. I got called at the last minute to come to this part of the state on Sunday because of the hurricane that's coming. And as of right now, which is about 8 p.m. on Sunday night, they still are not sure if that thing's going to make landfall or not. And even if it doesn't, it could very well cause a lot of damage. So CBN asked me to come. I jumped on the airplane, and 4 hours later, here I am. So obviously there's not much to report yet. I just came from the beach here at Juno Beach, and there's people out playing on the beach still, obviously wanting to come down and sort of see the beach, see what the waves look like. One guy told me, wow, I thought the waves would be a lot bigger. So kind of hurricane tourism, I guess, if you will, happening here. The beaches are technically closed. They've got crime scene tape sort of across the entrances to the beach, but people just went under it or tore it down and went down there anyway. Everybody wants to go get their picture taken, before the hurricane. As for the buildings and stuff in this area, the condos, the high rises are all either boarded up or they have like metal shutters over the windows. So very, very few stores or houses that are not boarded up at this point. If they aren't yet, it's probably because they have the roll down shutters that you can just close in a minute and don't have to install. For example, this place I'm going by right now, it doesn't have anything covering, but there are some roll down shutters that are already closed. So it must be that they've got the installed shutters and they'll pull them down when the time comes. It's still a good probably 24 hours before the storm gets here, if it indeed will get here. They say that the cone is like 125 miles, that as far as where they think it's going to go, something like 125 miles wide, not the cone itself, but just the track, the margin of error, let's say, is that wide. So that we are inside that cone right now, and so people are taking precautions. I went to the grocery store when I got here, and there were people checking out with big carts loads of food, liquor, and things like that. The water aisle was completely decimated, which is what you would expect by this point. So people are taking it seriously, I think, for the most part. And we will see if it hits or not. Now, right now they're saying that this thing is a Category 5 hurricane with 200 mile an hour winds going across the Bahamas. And they say that's a record. I think the previous record was 185 miles an hour or 188 miles an hour or something like that. So this is a serious storm. It's become a lot more serious. When we talked on, I guess, Thursday of last week about Puerto Rico, we were thinking it was only going to be a Category 2 when it got to the United States. So it's obviously changed. And you know what that tells us is that nobody really knows. The weathermen are doing their best to forecast, but in reality, God is the one driving this hurricane, and only He knows how strong it'll be and where it'll land. So I'm going to be chasing it. I'll be here for the week, trying to, make some reports about the hopefully not too much damage or destruction. Hopefully my reports will be about how everybody pulled together and then the storm went away and left them alone. That'd be great. But we will see. We'll see. Now, as you probably know, I've been to a bunch of these hurricanes. This time of year is just like my hurricane season, and I go and report on these disasters. Last year was let's see, two hurricanes: Hurricane Florence and Hurricane Michael. Michael being the Cat 5 hurricane that hit South Florida over on the Panhandle. Not South Florida, it hit North Florida on the Panhandle. And that caused some unbelievable damage, just some of the worst I've ever seen. I was fortunate enough to be able to survey the damage from a helicopter for about 3 days, fly around in this helicopter, and that was a lot of fun. Got some real good footage, and especially places like Mexico Beach, the damage was, wow, hard to fathom. Whole housing, suburbs that just were basically wiped off the map. They were just not there anymore. It was almost like just you'd see concrete slabs, and that was all that was left. And I have been told, and I've read, that currently, a year later, those places are still pretty much uninhabitable. Even the homes that survived the storm really didn't survive the storm, and that's one big lesson to take from these storms, is that just because your building or your house doesn't get destroyed by the storm does not mean that you're going to be any better off than the people who did have their homes and businesses destroyed by the storm. Because if your house is the only one left standing in your neighborhood, well, they're not going to get services back to your neighborhood very quickly. You're going to be in an uninhabitable neighborhood for literally years and maybe forever. So it might have been just as well if you had lost your house, because you likely had insurance on it. If you had lost your house, you could have collected the insurance money and you could have moved on, gone and bought a house somewhere else. Whereas if your house is the only one that survives in the neighborhood, you don't collect any insurance money and you're still unable to live in your house. So that's a problem for some people that survived Michael only to find out that they couldn't get into their houses anyway. And even a year later, they're still rebuilding down there. So that's kind of the fear here. This area of Florida has been hit by many, many hurricanes in the past, and they've gotten very good at weathering the hurricanes. Almost all of the light poles that you see here, at least the major ones, are made from very thick concrete now. They're not wooden anymore. They're not putting wooden telephone poles in now, and that is obviously going to help with high winds. The street lights, many of those I've seen are rigged up on a kind of pulley system, so they can go along today before the day before the hurricane hits, and they lower the street lights down to ground level so that they won't be catching the wind up there high and cause too much stress on the pole to topple the pole. So with just a pole sticking up in the air without anything on top of it, it's much more likely to weather the storm. So pretty smart. And I don't think people here are panicking by any stretch. It is hard to get a rental car or a hotel room here, I'll tell you that, because a lot of people just rent a car in order to get out, or they go get a hotel room because they believe it'll be safer in a hotel. Hotels typically have backup generators, so they'll continue to have air conditioning and things like that, whereas your home likely might not. So a lot of elderly people especially will go and rent hotel rooms so that they can have food, power, air conditioning, things like that, and have a sort of support network. So if this thing does turn around and come inland, I think it could be a worse thing, because they thought it wasn't going to hit until then now they're starting to say, well, maybe it actually will. And if this thing starts to go if it makes landfall in here, there will be quite a few more people that decided to stay rather than get in their car and leave and go to a relative's house or something. And they decided to stay because they didn't believe that the thing was going to make landfall. So if it does, we'll see what happens. As you know, like I said, I've covered a lot of these. How do I try to stay safe? Well, I try not to do anything real stupid. Some people might argue that simply being in this area right now would qualify as being stupid, but I think that if you're careful, you can do fine and not get killed. There's always that possibility. When we rode out Hurricane Florence, we ended up in a little salt box house of one of our listeners who was kind enough to offer it to my daughter and I, Amy, when we were there. But they were fleeing. They were going somewhere else. But they said, well, if you need a place to stay, you can stay in our house. We left a key outside for you. And that was very nice. As I think back on that, if Florence had been as bad as Michael was last year, if it had come ashore as a Cat 5 hurricane, that house we were in might not have survived. And I've talked to people who have been in homes that were blown away, and that's not a pretty picture. You don't want to be in a house as it's being dismantled around you by the wind. And if the windows blow out or the roof comes off, there's always a chance that you could go with it. And so I'm staying inland tonight, about 15 miles, 20 miles inland from the coast. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do, just depending on what happens with the hurricane on Monday. If I end up being stuck out in the hurricane, which during Hurricane Irma in South Florida, I got kicked out of my hotel room because I didn't make reservations long enough, and so somebody needed my room and they gave me the boot. So I was driving around in my rental car, and that's a scary place to be. But if I end up in a situation like that, what I would normally do is I would go to the sturdiest building I could find and park on the lee side of the building and just tuck up against the building and stay in my vehicle. That way it's less likely my vehicle's going to get tossed around or that I'm going to get smashed with flying debris, as long as the building that I'm behind survives. So like one time I went and hid in down in one of those loading docks in kind of a depression up against behind a Home Depot or a Walmart, something like that. So anyway, be praying for the people of Florida. Be praying for the people of the Bahamas for sure. The Bahamas looks like they got a pretty bad hit, and I hope that they didn't have too many deaths or injuries or anything like that. Of course, it's always worse being in a hurricane if you're on an island, because the resupply is a lot more difficult, getting food and medicines and things out there. We learned that in the hurricane in Maria 2 years ago on Puerto Rico. So anyway, I'm going to be filming. I'm going to be perhaps going live, and I'm going to be making live packages for the Christian Broadcasting Network starting this morning, as you're watching this, Monday morning. So I hope you'll watch it and stay tuned. I'm Chuck Holton, and this has been The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.